Welcome, everyone. I'm Brian Reynolds, the Chancellor with the Archdiocese of Louisville. We're glad to have you join us for our podcast series, What's New in ArchLou? This show highlights the people and ministries of the Archdiocese, the Catholic Church in Central Kentucky. Join us each month as we welcome guests to discuss what's new in the Archdiocese and invite you to get involved as you deepen your own engagement with your Catholic faith. This program is brought to you by the ArchLou Podcast Network. Now, as is our tradition, we have wonderful guests again today. We want to welcome Martine Siegel and Emily Lindon. I'll tell you a little bit about them, and then we'll get a chance to have them introduce themselves. But welcome, both of you, first of all. Martine has served as the Director of Counseling Services and as our Victim Assistance Coordinator for the Archdiocese. She works out of the Office of Family and Life Ministries. Before taking this role, Martine served for many years as a counselor at Holy Trinity School and as a pastoral associate there as well. Martine also serves as a clinical nurse specialist in psychiatry at the Norton Hospital Emergency Department. She's also a member of Holy Trinity Parish. Emily Lindon, one-time Spanish teacher I learned, is the school counselor at St. Patrick's School in Louisville, serving first as a teacher in 2016 and then as a school counselor in 2017, and still does that now. Martine and Emily, before we get into the content of our day, let's take a couple minutes to learn more about you. If maybe you could just tell us, beyond this biography, just a little bit about yourself. And Martine, you're up first.
Oh, okay. Well, aside from what you said, I have 4 beautiful grown children. I have 2 dogs, 5 cats, and 10 chickens. I love to take care of things. And I, don't have a lot of spare time, but the spare time I have, I spend with my family. And I love the being able to work in my faith community with my psychiatric background.
Yeah, you have lots of energy time with your family. I know that because I know your kids, and I also know your chickens. Only I know your eggs that I get to share sometimes, and I'm grateful for that. Okay, Emily, how about you? Give us a little bit of more information about you.
Sure. I grew up in Lexington, so my family is just down the road here in Louisville. It's just me and my dog Poppy in the Highlands, so I spend a lot of time outside and trying to soak up the sunshine when I'm not in school with all our wonderful little people. So I grew up in Lexington, went to school in Danville, Kentucky at Center College, and landed here. Love it so far.
How did you get into this work?
Well, when I came to Louisville, I immediately started my master's in school counseling. When I was in school in Danville, I always knew that I'd be working with kids. It was just finding out in what capacity, and it came to me quickly, and I've loved it ever since.
That's great.
Yeah.
Martine, you've been doing this a long time, and my kids grew up in the Holy Trinity with you there, and so I know that background. Why did you get started in this work?
Well, I walked into Norton Hospital when I was 18 years old. They offered me a job in psychiatry, and I never looked back. Mm-hmm. I loved every minute of it, even as a college student, and then as I graduated and continued getting degrees, I moved into different positions, and I love working with children. I love working with adults.
That's great. Good. Listen, we have we could chat for a long time because both of you have such interesting experiences, but we have kind of a serious topic to talk about today, which has to do with what's going on in our community, in our schools, in our families. And the topic is really mental health and social issues and affecting people. So help us unpack this. Our students are back in our 48 Catholic schools as of mid-August. Of course, our schools are known for formation in the faith and academic excellence. But today we want to explore the particular dimension of social and emotional health of students and their families. Now, there's lots in the news every day, in the papers and on television, about increasing challenges with mental health among our children, young people, and for that matter, adults as well. There are many efforts in our parishes and schools to help students and families. Now, Martine, you deal with all of our schools regarding these issues. What have you been observing of late maybe across the system related to social emotional health? Can you give us some observations?
Well, I think that we're taking that much more seriously than we had in the past, looking at the entire child and knowing that educationally we have to take care of their mental health to help them learn. And there's so many more programs and advantages that we can give our counselors to help with that. We have a fantastic superintendent, Mary Beth Bowling, and Amy Knoll and Mary Parola have been instrumental in getting those programs in place through grant money to help train our counselors in this area. We certainly are seeing a rise in depression and anxiety and behavioral issues in our students that need to be addressed, and we want to do it in the best way possible.
What does this topic of mental health encompass? What are the subsets of that? What does that mean?
Well, it has quite a range. We have children who have documented mental illness that is pretty severe. We have cases of children who develop milder disabilities with their mental health, but it always affects their learning. And we have to address these things because years ago they may have gone to different schools, but now they're in ours. And so it becomes part of who they are and how we work with their educational plan.
Is what you observe in our schools the same or different than what's going on in neighborhoods and the community at large?
I would say it's very much the same. I think things that are going on in our neighborhoods and city are increasing our children's anxiety. They're increasing their depression. Our environment right now doesn't feel safe to a lot of them, nor do I think it feels safe to a lot of adults. Yeah. And so they're picking up on their parents' anxiety, and they're coming to school sometimes worried about the state of our city and community.
Emily, help us a little bit. You have your feet on the ground every day as a school counselor. You're with the children at a pretty large school at St. Patrick's.
That's right.
What can you add to what Martine shared? What do you observe?
Well, to your question about what is mental health and what does that encompass, I think it's tricky. There is this growing awareness of all of our mental health needs. And, I'm hopeful that with that will come more understanding about what that encompasses, because we all have mental health. I think this shift in understanding our mental health as a key piece of our overall health is critical. So we're observing everything that Martine has just said when we think about kids coming to school with less safety and security. That really runs the gamut in all communities. I think, we've all just lived through a pandemic, and kids of all ages, we're working with preschoolers through 12th graders, and all of those kids look to the grown-ups in their lives to establish a baseline level of safety and security. And so I think there are a lot of ways that in all of our families, there's not a ton of awareness of how that's shifted. Just baseline stress levels changing in your home changes that for kids.
Help me then. Both of you can help me with this. So is this about kids feeling depressed? Is this about anxiety and stress because I feel I can't control things? Is this about just general nervousness? I mean, that always was around. Why? What is that? What we're talking about? Help me more. I'm trying to get very practical.
I think the anxiety and the depression has worsened before the pandemic.
Yeah.
It's gotten worse after. But expectations on them are higher. And I think they have packed days. I think they're exhausted. I think that they feel sometimes they can't reach the bar that's expected of them. And they're taking on an awful lot to be so little. And it just grows as they go through school. And Emily, I don't know if you're seeing that in the school itself.
Absolutely. And I think it can be hard for people to understand because we've all experienced sadness and we've all experienced worries and anxiety. And so, if you've got a friend who's sharing about their child with anxiety, it may seem to you like, oh, well, we all have worries. We can just move right along and figure that out. But what we're really seeing is an increase in the incidence of true clinical anxiety and depression, along with another long list of other clinical mental health disorders.
It's a bit frightening. At first, what I was hearing sounded fairly, I don't know, normal is the wrong word. Everybody has bad days. Everybody feels nervous.
Yeah.
Everybody's trying to get a better test grade of a child or be on the right sports team. But this sounds a lot more serious. What do we do in response here? What does the system do? And then Emily, I'll ask what you do in a second. Martine, what do we do as a school system to deal with these questions?
Well, one of the things we do, because of the increased anxiety and depression, we're seeing a lot of suicidal ideation. We're seeing some suicide attempts. And that speaks to how severe what they're experiencing is. And so we implemented the SOS, or Signs of Suicide program, 3 years ago in our schools, which has, yesterday, the counselors gave me a tremendous amount of positive feedback on that from both parents and students, because we're addressing this topic to normalize it, and we want the children to come forward if they're experiencing those feelings. We can't ignore this,
So for the system, you give resources for parents?
I give resources for parents. I will custom fit a therapist in our community, which we have wonderful mental health community of professionals, and I will make sure that child gets to the level of care they need, as well as whatever the parent's financial situation is.
Emily, how about what goes on, and particularly for you?
Sure. To the point of all of us having mental health, right? We have sources of strength, and then we sometimes have challenges. We really try to meet all of our students where they are. So that can start at the building level. We, like Martine is suggesting, there are a number of programs that every single one of our students participate in. So the Signs of Suicide program is something that our 6th through 8th graders participate in. The network of counselors has worked together to find some resources that all of the students in this district can benefit from. So we've recently implemented a social emotional learning curriculum district-wide, which seems to be going really well. And then each school, one thing that I love about working in this district is that we still have the autonomy to really look at what our building needs. So, for example, my building is using a mindfulness curriculum called Calma, and working on teaching some of those mindfulness and self-regulation skills to every child in the building really helps us kind of get down to the bottom of what's going on for individuals later.
Okay, unpack that. Mindfulness and self-regulation. I think I get it, but say a little more for me.
Yes. So when we look at social emotional learning, it is, it's something that a lot of times we're doing and not realizing that we're doing. So we've done quite a bit of work in my space in identifying some of the ways that we've been building capacity in those skills for kids. So we're looking at 5 areas: self-awareness, your ability to say, okay, here's how I'm feeling right now. Many people don't have that capacity. Many grown-ups that probably don't have that capacity to say, this is what's going on for me, this is how I'm feeling. So that's self-awareness. And then self-regulation comes next. I acknowledge that I'm in this space. What am I going to do to cope with that, to move past it, or to be with it for a while? So self-awareness, self-regulation. Then we're looking at social awareness and relationship skills. You can imagine that plays out all day, every day in the school setting. Social awareness and relationship skills. Kids are learning.
Bullying and all that stuff?
Yep. Kids are learning how to have human interactions with each other, which seems like it may come naturally, but in reality, we have to teach kids those skills. And then the final of those 5th capacities that we're looking at is responsible decision making.
So all that gets built into the curriculum, things we do with the children and so forth. Wow. And Martine, how do faculty members respond to that?
They love it. They love it. It helps in the classroom, obviously, helps with the teaching, helps with attention span, and the children feel heard, and that's huge for a teacher.
Yeah. How about parents? What do you hear from them, Emily? When parents, my child comes home and says, today they were teaching us to be, I'm sure they don't say more self-aware, but they may. But they were teaching me to know what I feel and know how to control my behavior. What do you hear from parents?
Sure. I think, there are a lot of ways that we have been teaching these skills in classrooms with our master teachers for years, but we haven't been naming it and communicating it as well to our families. And so since we've really tried to lean into that and start looping our parents in on exactly what we're working on, we've gotten a lot of very positive feedback. I'll hear from families that at the dinner table, their students will describe a tough interaction and how they remembered to pause and take a deep breath and practice some of their mindfulness skills. And then they didn't have an argument with their teacher or classmate. So we get a lot of positive anecdotal feedback, and just generally, I hear from parents that their kids are teaching them some of the skills they're learning at school.
Oh, from watching people in how they drive on the expressway and how they act in the supermarket. Maybe we should give these skills to everybody. It seems to me
I think it would be a great idea.
There's a real need in the community. Wow. So instead of what we would call reading, writing, and arithmetic, we're taking care of the whole person. Maybe we always did, but that really seems to be a significant focus for our work now. Is that correct?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Wow, interesting. Okay, Martine, parents in this. When a parent is worried about their child, parents all worried about their children at different stages. It used to be because for me, it was failing math, but that's a different topic. But so what do we say to parents? How can we help parents if they have a concern, or even more? What should they be looking for? Not that we don't want to have them turn into doing diagnosis of their kids, but what should they be looking for to say, I got to get some help?
Well, I think the key thing that I try to teach parents is as early as possible to start that open communication with their child, so that they talk. So that the child feels free to come to their parent with whatever's going on. That open line of communication is so vital to knowing your child. And then, of course, parents may be the first to notice a change in their child's behavior. They're isolating, they're not acting the same, they seem scared or angry or any other number of emotions, and it's not normal for them. They may call me and ask what I think might be going on. So if there's that line of communication, that might be easier to figure out, but otherwise we'll try to figure it out together.
And Emily, when a parent contacts you, or maybe a teacher says, Emily, could you talk to this little boy or little girl because they're exhibiting something that the teacher's worried about. What steps do you take?
Sure, those initial steps. I think, in a school counseling setting, we don't serve as that child's clinician, right?
Okay.
We're kind of boots on the ground, trying to assess what's going on here. Is this something that we can teach you some very basic, rudimentary coping skills and get through this together? Or is this something that we need to connect and refer out for? So when a student comes to me, referred by a parent or a teacher, or quite often in our school, referred by themselves, I'm trying to sit down with them and really figure out, is this situational? Is this something we can work through? So is this, and it's just a case-by-case basis. So many times it's something that we can work through situationally in the building, but more and more we're needing to refer out. And to your question, to Martine, I think one of the biggest misconceptions with families right now is that, asking your kids about their mental health is going to cause a problem for them. That to ask them, how are you feeling? What's going on? Is going to put the idea in their head that they have a problem. And that's just not what the research suggests. So if I find myself quite often giving that advice to parents. Asking open-ended questions is fine. Asking direct questions is fine. You will not introduce a mental health diagnosis to a child. Most often we see that the kids are really hungry to be asked.
That's a really good point. Now, you threw in there a little line. The kids self-refer?
They do.
What does that mean?
Yeah. So we really try to make school counseling in my school an intervention that's accessible to everyone and really normalized. So one of the things I think, when we're building self-awareness and trying to get these skills to all kids, I think it's really important that everybody knows that we all need a little bit of help sometimes. It's not a big emergency if you need to pop by the counselor's office and ask for a tip. It's something that everybody has access to and most people in your class have used. So the kids have a number of ways that they can just ask to stop by and see us if they need to. Obviously, we limit taking them away from their core instruction. And we've got a pretty good groove going on. But I think it's important that all kids everywhere know that, there is somebody, even if it's not your school counselor, there's a safe grown-up who's there to help you if you need it.
Very good. Part of our context is different than other forms of education because we do this in a faith context. Our schools are mostly sponsored by parishes. We have a religious element. We have a worship community. We have a prayer life. How does faith interact with this question of mental health?
In a huge way. I think that all the research, all the data show, and I've said this to parents in meetings and in various places, that the more your child is connected to a faith community, no matter what your faith is, the less problems you're going to see with your child because they are a part of a bigger thing than the family. You and I both know how wonderful it was for our children to grow up with all the people at Holy Trinity who checked on them every Sunday, who watched them grow up. That's huge for a child to be connected to that. Research shows they have less depression, less anxiety, less behavioral issues, all sorts of positive outcomes for being connected to their faith.
Interesting. Emily, can you, your own reflection on that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that connectedness in the community cannot be overstated, the importance of that. When we think about it in the context of the school building, one graphic that we've been using a lot lately overlays the fruits of the Spirit with those social emotional learning competencies. Really? And it aligns so beautifully. And it's one of those situations where I think there's been a misconception of this, social emotional learning science world versus the faith world. And that's just not the case. It aligns quite perfectly. And, we've been working to draw everybody's attention to the work that we're already doing just through our religion classes.
I'm learning a lot here. So
yeah.
the fruits of the Spirit so you're looking at those through the social emotional lens. Mm-hmm. How fascinating.
Yeah, that's great.
I'm putting you on the spot. What are other connections? How does obviously taking care of the whole person, you're going to help to see that.
Yeah.
That kids are everybody's having more stresses and acting out because of that or whatever one causes the other. Where do we integrate this in I get the fruits of the Spirit. Are there other themes in a school? Are there other things that you've seen? Does it show up in how we do sports? Does it show up in how we do what we read? Mm-hmm. I'm putting words to it because I just don't know. Can you?
Well, I think I may be misunderstanding your question, but I think part of what's unique about our Catholic schools, we ask this question a lot. Like when you walk into the classroom, how do you know that this is a Catholic classroom? And in my experience, as someone who did not grow up Catholic, I think, when I walk into the classroom, nearly every time we're catching those moments of instruction in the religion classroom, we're seeing, that completely aligns with everything that we know about what we need socially and emotionally, right? So when you're hearing a lesson on how to extend forgiveness, right?
Good.
You're also hearing a lesson about how to interact socially, right? You're learning a lesson about how to behave like Jesus and also how to have social responsibility. It's all perfectly aligned.
Great. Perfect example. That's why I was looking for examples like that because that is an integration of these themes mm-hmm. in the teaching learning activity. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. Absolutely. Anything else strike you, Martine, in that? How about when you're helping parents with a really young one, they're first coming into school, or when they're a child's moving on out of school? Anything happen with parents and kids in that area?
Well, obviously we want them to be fully engaged in their faith. So we have those discussions a lot because it will benefit the child. And obviously we have that discussion when they're on their way out, because we don't want to lose them. And we know that we lose them at that point sometimes. And as they're moving into more independence and high school, we're needed that much more.
Yeah.
But, we don't want to just see people at sacramental times. We want to see them every week. and we want to see their children, and we want to watch them grow, and we want to all be a support to them. And we have that benefit, and we want them to utilize it because it's a beautiful thing.
Boy, you make me even more proud to be part of the Catholic system and the Catholic faith and the Catholic schools in this local community. This idea of attending to the whole person, and so it's not just about addressing bullying or depression because they behave better, but because it makes them healthier, and that's really great. Okay. Now, when I view children and adults, for that matter, we seem to carry our phones around. We seem to be following everything on social media. I don't know all the different programs these days, but there's lots of them. None of that was part of my experience, but it certainly is part of my children and grandchildren's experience. So social media, obviously that's a big factor in our schools. I know it's the source of interaction that's positive and not so positive. Mm-hmm. How does social media play out in mental health and our schooling world? Who wants to get us started there?
Well, I will say that you're right. There's a lot of blessings to social media. There's a lot of downside too. Children can compare themselves to others on social media and cause a great deal of depression and anxiety. Obviously, it is a conduit for bullying, one that's sometimes very hard to get your hands around. And this is done in various ways, not just through, say, Facebook or other ways. The kids have a million different ways, it seems, to communicate on social media now. We try to incorporate that in a lot of what we teach them, but it is their world. They've grown up with it. This is the first generation to have never known life without social media or the internet, for that matter. So it certainly has its downside in a lot of ways, and I know you probably see that in the schools, don't you, Emily?
Sure do. I would say there are a couple of ways that it impacts us all day, every day, right? The first is very situational when those incidents occur, and then the second is the overall impact on the child. And so most often, if I'm speaking with a parent about social media, it's because they're calling to let me know that there's been an issue. And at that stage, it can be very hard for anyone in the school, anyone at home for that matter, to kind of backtrack and figure out where we went wrong. There's just a lot of opportunity when people are alone with a screen to make decisions that they may not otherwise make. And we know that kids' brains aren't developed enough to make that responsible decision initially. So they've got access to a lot of things that they're just not really equipped to handle. So that's the first way, the situational things that take a lot of time and energy in the school to kind of unpack. And then the overall impact on kids. I think the Surgeon General this May released something on social media, citing a study, I think from 2019 is when this all really started coming out, that kids who spend more than 3 hours a day on screen time are doubling their risk of anxiety and depression. And, 3 hours a day to me sounds like a lot, but when you break it down, we're talking time in the car, at little brother's soccer practice, and the average that kids are spending on screen time these days is 3.5 hours. Wow. So we know that on average our kids are on screens 3.5 hours, then that it only takes 3 to double your risk for anxiety and depression. So it's incumbent upon us as the grown-ups, as we like to say, to really set limits on that for them.
We've all seen families gather at a restaurant, and everybody, including the adults, are sitting at the table. No one's talking. They're all looking at their phones. I guess that's a signal of the 3.5 hours in action. But the internet can also be a place to resource young people, isn't it? That they can get help with their things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a blessing for sure in many ways. They have access to great things at their fingertips, and they have access to bad things at their fingertips. We do know that when a child gets hospitalized, one of the core reasons that's brought up during the hospitalization is the effect of social media on their life. So that has taken their depression or anxiety or suicidal ideation to a new level. But many times the source is social media.
I do know that just the impact of cell phones watching them late at night.
Yep.
My wife's a high school teacher, and I've noticed it, frankly, in myself. If I start reading screen messages
Yep.
and then try to go to sleep, it doesn't work.
It's not happening.
And
The
so
bright
that's
lights
happened to
on your
kids.
brain.
Yeah. So for young people, how a family deals with cell phones in private spaces and at bedtime and all those things are all part of what has to get attention, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point that, to your point, that we also have to learn to use these things wisely, right? There are many, many things in our lives that we as adults know how to moderate, and it's our job to teach kids how to do that. There are lots of things that come with pros and cons, and the internet and social media is certainly one of them. So I think kind of just shifting our perspective on that from it's an unending world of possibilities to what's the appropriate amount and what can we use, how can we teach them what that is.
Just one of the many topics under this topic of mental health. Thanks. We're grateful to both of you. I know, Emily, you represent a whole cadre of counselors. All of our schools have counselors now. That's changed in the 30-plus years I've been around here. And what a great addition to counselors. We used to be high schools. You had that because they were doing with colleges. And so now we make it integrated into the whole curriculum, beginning with pre-K. That's a wonderful thing. So I know you represent the cadre. So on behalf of the Archdiocese, thank all of your peers because you make this thing even better every day. Martine, the leadership you brought to our safe environment work, to our helping victims of abuse and other challenging things that happen in their lives, and then to oversee the resourcing of our schools and our counselors, what a great gift. We're real lucky, but we're also very grateful. So I thank you for what you do. And I thank you, listeners and viewers, for tuning in to our show. And please join us in the future again as we bring you What's New in ArchLou. Thanks for being with us.